Welcome, all pregnant families, midwives, or birth workers. This is Tracy Anderson Askew, your host for the Transform Your Birth podcast, changing your mind about birth one story at a time. Each week, we will be exploring a birth story through the lens of what birth can teach us. I'll be digging deep into each story so you can learn what it is that can change the way a birth unfolds. We can't control birth, but we can influence it. So listen in to find out how. Enjoy. Lynn Schulte has been a pelvic health physical therapist for over 30 years, and she is the founder and principal instructor of the Institute for Birth Healing. Lynn helps pregnant women to balance their body, both before and after birth. She is on a mission to help women prevent and avoid birth complexity, injury and wounding by promoting optimal physiology for the labour and pushing stages of birth. Knowing we are more than just our bodies, Lynn works on all levels, physically, energetically and spiritually, with women to help them access their full potential. She offers a certification process to help birth professionals become birth healing practitioners. In this episode, we talk specifically about 3 areas of the body worth focusing on: balancing the body, promoting good positioning of the baby, and avoiding tearing are all great goals and worth preparing for. Fascinating insights from a woman who knows her trade. Also included in the show notes are links that include her programs, a directory of body workers, and some wonderful resources that will support the preparation for birth. I feel so proud to bring you this episode, so enjoy.
Before we begin, a note from our sponsor. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. Most of the stories you will hear through this podcast are graduates of the Transform Your Birth workshop held in Canberra. Our Transform Your Birth Today course is now available to anyone, anywhere, at any time, and includes all the wonderful wisdom of this course and live weekly catch-ups when you need it with our host, Tracy. For a little taste, please accept our pregnancy gift offer, which contains free the first few lessons and some essential wisdom for pregnancy. The link can be found in these show notes or visit transformyourbirth.com.au. And now for the episode.
Welcome, everybody. It's another episode of the Transform Your Birth podcast. And I like to bring special guests every so often, particularly people who have an expertise in an area that is really important. And so today we have the lovely Lynn Schulte from the US. And Lynn's going to talk to us broadly about preparing your body for birth and giving us some really good tips around understanding certain parts of the body and how we can actually prepare, and so much around birth and being able to navigate the mystery of birth comes down to the preparation that we do. So welcome, Lynn. Thank you for coming.
Thanks so much, Tracy, for having me. I so appreciate any opportunity I get to share what I know with mamas especially. So
beautiful.
This is such a magical time for people who are pregnant, and yet it can be also a really kind of interesting time, challenging. It can create some anxiety for women to like, how is this baby coming out? And I love giving information to help them feel more confident in what happens. They know that, hey, this is natural. This is, the body's meant to do this, everybody. Let's keep that in mind. Okay.
Yeah, that's what we're all about here. And to bring in some birth wisdom. So, Lynn, tell us about how you got into this work and a little bit about your background and why you became so interested in it.
Yeah, well, boy, I want to go back so I've been a physical therapist for over 30 years, and I have done lots of different aspects of physical therapy. In 2000, or no, wait, it was 1998, I went into women's health, and excuse me, I have a cold. I went into women's health and I absolutely fell in love with it. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Then 2 years later, I had my first son, and I was so lit on fire after having him. It ignited something within me that I was like, I need to get into this work. In my head, and I can remember being in my birth room in the hospital going, should I become a midwife? Should I become an OB? Like, I need to be a part of birth. And
sounds like a calling to me.
Oh, it was visceral one. And I just,
Wow.
it was so, I loved it. I mean, I had two relatively easy births. So my births were 7 and 8 hours, and um, very uncomplicated. I was not traumatized or have any issues other than maybe a little bit of a outie of a belly button now. But a lot of people ask me if I get into this work because of what happened to me. And I know that is very common for a lot of birth
Mm.
workers, is that they have a negative experience of their birth. And so they want to help others not have that. Well, that's not my story. I got something lit on fire inside of me. But it wasn't until I moved from Seattle, Washington to Boulder, Colorado, where I had to start my practice all over again and, get the word out about my work. I started teaching how to lose the pooch for good classes to new moms. And it was a way to help them learn more about like why their belly felt the way it does after birth and how to re-strengthen it safely. And then I just started seeing postpartum women in my practice. And I was only seeing postpartum women. And that's what helped me to discover the patterns that I kept finding in every single person that laid down on my table. Be like, there it is again. There it is again. And the same thing. And so I figured out what was going on and how to release those patterns. And I was getting women out of pain in one session. And they were not having pain with intercourse after one session, and they weren't leaking, and all these amazing results in a 60-minute session. And so I started putting on YouTube what I was finding in the postpartum body. And I started getting emails from women all over the world saying, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I have. Do you know someone who can help me? And I was like, well, not really, because what I discovered on my own. It's not like it's something I learned somewhere at a course
Mm.
that others might know. And so I'm like, well, you can try a pelvic floor physical therapist. You can try a visceral manipulation practitioner and see. But unless that, someone studied with me, they don't know the patterns and the ways to treat the postpartum body in the way that is helpful.
Yeah.
And so that kind of got me, stirred up, because it's like I know what I am doing is effective. And I started applying, like, if this is happening in the postpartum, then what does that mean for our pregnant clients? What can
Mm.
we do in our pregnant clients to help set them up for a smoother birth?
Right.
And and so then I started working with more and more pregnant clients and helping them to prepare their body for birth. And, I've just heard over the years from different people like, oh my gosh, Lynn, when you did that, that was so helpful. Or when you told us to do that, Lynn, that was so helpful. It really sped
Mm.
the birth along. So I know that what I'm doing is effective. It's just we don't have enough research on this to be able to prove
Mm.
that X, A equals B, or, it's not in the literature yet. Someday maybe, but so when I started working with my pregnant clients, I realized that there were several common themes that were causing issues in their pregnancy. And and so as I'm assessing a pregnant client, there's three main areas of the body that I like to assess, and
Mm.
I feel would be ideal to have these areas of the bodies assessed prior to going into labor. And what I'd like to share with you all is just some of the common themes of things that can cause problems in the body. And I've always asked the question, Tracy, why, or like myself, why did I have a 7 or 8 hour birth and others
Mm.
have a 42, 3-day
Yeah.
birth?
Yeah.
Like,
It's
what's
quite the
the
mystery, isn't it, Lynn?
Yes, yes.
Mm.
I love living in the question. I'm like, I wonder why, I wonder if, So um what I've come to discover is that there are many facets that impact birth. There's
Yeah.
physical, there's emotional, and there's also energetic too.
Mm.
And so, you've heard those stories of moms just holding baby in because of X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
And as soon as X, Y, or Z happens, baby comes out, right? So there
Hmm.
is a will, or energetic holding that some people can do that are just not going to let their baby come on out. That's one thing. There could be a lot of subconscious or other issues going on. And then there's the physical. And the
Mm.
physical are the most easiest ones for us to address because we can see them.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest things that we need to do in order to have the smoothest birth possible is to make sure that baby can get into the best position possible.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of spinningbabies.com. It's an
Mm.
awesome website, awesome resource for any pregnant client to just understand some things that you can do to try to create balance in your body. Because over the years, what I've learned is that it's what a person brings in their body to the birth that impacts the birth.
Yeah.
So if a person, let's talk in the abdomen. So the abdomen is one of the areas I love to assess. And what we want to look at in the abdomen is the baby inhabiting both sides of the belly? Is the baby only on one side and hanging out on one side? You
Mm.
see, because the baby goes where there is space.
Yeah.
And so if there's tension or restriction in the ligaments or the fascia, that's going to pull the uterus off to one side and baby's going to get stuck over there.
Mm.
And that's why we want, as a pregnant person, I want you to pay attention and like, where's my baby? Is my baby able to get on both sides of my belly? Or is it, do I look lopsided? If you look at some bellies, you can see that the baby is only on this one side.
Mm.
But I've also looked at really beautiful round bellies. And when I go to assess the mobility of that belly, it's restricted.
Right.
So I had a client that came to see me, and she was a first-time pregnant mama. And she was in her late second trimester, I think, when I saw her around or early third. And she was just coming in because she had heard this it was a good idea. And I'm so glad she did. And she said the most curious thing to me. She's like, I always ask my mamas, do you have a sense of where your baby is in your belly? Like, do you know where the head is? Do you know where the feet are or the butt or whatever? And they're yes or no. Well, she said, "Oh, I know exactly where my baby is." Have you ever heard that, Tracy?
No.
For a first-time mom? No, I haven't either. And so that just kind of raised that little red flag like, "Huh, that's interesting. Okay." And like I said, I looked at her and her belly was nice and midline and beautifully round. But when I went to mobilize it and move it, and moms, you can do this to your belly. Put your hands on either side of the baby, of your belly, and see how far can you push it to one side. Don't create pain, okay?
Mm.
And you do it gently,
Yeah.
but you should be able to move that belly off to one side and see how far you go. And then bring it back to the midline and then move it to the other side, and it should be even. You should be able to move it as far right as you can far left. Now, with this pregnant first time mama that I'm working on, she was so tight on her right hand side. The belly would not move to the left at all. And it would move more to the right, but it would not go to the left. Well, this client had had an appendectomy in her childhood. And appendectomies are one of the most common themes that I find in my pregnant clients that have restricted right side mobility. They cannot move the belly to the left. And what happens is when they go in to do the surgery to take out the appendectomy, it creates scar tissue in there. And that scar tissue forms very haphazardly and it starts to anchor down the uterus towards the right. And
That's
so the
interesting.
uterus can only move to the right. So baby goes where there's space. So baby's off to the right-hand side. And when I went to release the tightness in her uterine ligaments and in her lower abdominal fascia from the scar tissue, then we got even mobility side to side in one session. And she was just like, whoa, that's different. And her belly was more relaxed. But
Mm.
because this was her first time pregnancy, she had no idea that there was anything wrong with her belly.
So, what were you
And
able to do in that session, Lynn, in terms of dealing with scar tissue, which is obviously something you can't change, but what, like, help us
it
to understand the mechanism for that?
you can't get rid of scar tissue, but you
No.
can increase its flexibility. You
Right.
can help to get more flexible. And so I just gently worked with softening that scar tissue and helping to stretch and mobilize and get that uterus to move. And sometimes it's the uterine ligament. So I know how to release the uterosacral ligament, the broad
Mm.
ligament, the round ligaments. We can balance all those. And
Mm.
then Spinning Babies has a wonderful inversion that is an exercise, and you need to do it correctly. So please check that website and learn how to do it. But you basically put your head down and your butt up in the air and you let the belly dangle. And that allows the uterine ligaments to stretch out and try to become even in that
Right.
inverted space. Okay.
Right. So, what I'm
Um,
hearing from you is balance within the body is very important to create a lot of space, which then promotes really good positioning. So,
Absolutely.
give us a few little ideas, Lynn, then from a preventative point of view, what women can do in their pregnancy that can support that balance.
So in the belly, there's really not much you can do other than the inversion. Okay. So the
Right.
inversion is a great exercise to do for that.
Would
There's
massaging the belly be useful?
Yeah, but you have to check out the mobility of it. Like,
Right. Okay.
just rubbing your belly is not going to do anything.
Mm.
You want to work where there's a restriction. So there's a couple of other movements that I teach, and I have a directory of students who have studied with me, and I'm not sure how many I have done. I do have probably two handfuls of students, maybe more, in all of Australia that have studied with me. So I know I have some practitioners in Sydney and Melbourne, and maybe one in Perth. And I know there's a couple of others dotted around in there as well. But there's other movements that, really assess the belly that I just don't feel comfortable instructing over a podcast how
Yeah, of
women,
course.
women
Yeah, yeah.
do it. But that side to side motion is something that
Mm.
anybody can do to themselves
Check. Yeah.
to just check and make sure there's even mobility side to side. So for the belly, the inversion is a great, great option for trying to keep balance and to create space for your baby. Now, the other fun fact, the other fun thing to look at is the linea negra is that brown line or that line that comes up the belly that gets bigger and bigger as you get more and more pregnant.
Yeah.
Well, that line actually, oh, you know what? There's Fiona Hallam is a midwife in Australia, and she teaches some of this work as well. So there are practitioners, and Gabrielle Brennan is also down in Australia as well, and she has amazing bodywork practice to help women. I forget where exactly she is though, but she was teaching me about this line,
Mm.
and that the line should go straight up and down. But if there's tension in the body, the line goes to where there's tension.
Uh,
So if you look at your belly and you see the line kind of curve off by your belly button, or it comes down and it curves away from the belly button. So instead of going straight up and down, it's kind of doing this at
yeah.
the around the belly button. That's telling you have tension in your left rib cage and down in your right lower quadrant. So
Mm.
where the line is pulling to is telling you where you have tension. And
Interesting.
so,
Like an
um,
arrow pointing.
yes, exactly. It's pointing you right to it.
Yeah.
Other big piece that everybody can work on is your rib cage expansion. So a lot of times to make room for baby, women tend to lift their upper their anterior ribs up. So they start thrusting the rib cage forward to create more space. Well, that tightens down the back part of your rib cage. And
Mm.
that will, again, limit space for baby. So making sure that you try to keep your ribs as stacked on top of your pelvis as possible and really breathe into the back part of your rib cage. If you put your hands around your ribs so that your thumbs are in the back part and your fingers are in the front of your ribs, so just on your side,
Yeah.
and breathe, but your ribs in the back should move as much as the ribs in the front.
Hmm. Okay, I
Okay.
can feel that. I'm
That's
doing that
another.
now for those listening.
Yeah,
Putting your
yeah.
thumb on the
So
back of your ribs and your fingers around the front, breathing and feeling the expansion of both the front and the back ribs. Interesting.
should be even. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's something you can do to help create a little bit more space for babe is make sure that the back part of your ribs are not tight.
Mm.
Okay. So now let's move down to the pelvis. Now, this is
Okay.
something, there's definitely something that you all can do to help create balance in your pelvis. One thing that can be challenging is if you have any sort of falls or impacts from maybe falling on the stairs or falling on ice. I live in the mountains, so we ski here. So snowboarding and sledding and any type of issue with slipping and falling and landing on your butt or your tailbone, those can cause impact traumas to those bones. And the sacrum is that triangular bone at the base of your spine that is
Yeah.
between your two hip bones. And that sacrum needs to lift backwards. And so it needs to, in order for a baby to get into the pelvis, the top part of your sacrum needs to move backwards to increase the pelvic inlet space for baby to come on in. Then once it hits the pelvic floor muscles, then the tailbone needs to lift backwards and your two sit bones need to splay apart. And that's what helps open up the pelvic outlet for baby to come on out. Now, so the sacrum is a really key piece to birth and
Right.
allowing it to move. And so many women have low back pain during pregnancy. It's very, very common. And a lot of providers dismiss it as, oh, well, you're pregnant. What do you expect? Type of philosophy. And I just don't agree to that.
No, that's a red light, isn't it?
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
It's telling you there's a dysfunction going on in the body. So pain alerts you to dysfunction.
Mm,
And so you need to figure out what is creating that dysfunction in the first place. And a lot of women have pain at the sacroiliac joints, and that's right where the sacrum attaches to your hip bone,
yeah.
and it needs to move. And so there's all different kinds of things that can cause dysfunction and back pain in the pelvis and in the low back. And because the ligaments are starting to get softer and things, especially as we get into that third trimester and we're starting to prepare for birth, everything's starting to soften so that it can open and for baby's passage. So what is so important and what you can do to help yourself have as smooth a birth as possible is to make sure that you keep your pressures on your pelvis as even as possible. A lot of people like to maybe sit on the couch and they'll sit on one hip and they'll tuck their legs underneath them off to one
Yeah.
side.
Yeah, yeah.
Now we have all that pressure on one side of your pelvis. Well, your pelvis is really mushy, gushy, gooey at this stage of the game. And so any amount of pressure, and now I don't want you to think that you're going to fall apart, everybody. You're not. But what I want you to become aware of is that if you sit like that all the time, you're
Mm,
going to have that pattern ingrained into your pelvis.
mm,
And then it's going to make it harder for it to do what it needs to do for birth. So as you are moving through your pregnancy, please be aware of how you're sitting and
mm.
make sure that whatever one leg is doing, the other leg is doing. So you can sit on your couch crisscross applesauce, with your legs folded and tucked underneath because the left side is doing what the right side is doing.
Mm.
But we don't want to be crossing our legs.
Yeah,
That puts a lot
crossing our
of
legs is
torque.
fun, isn't it? Yeah.
It puts a lot of torque on our pelvis
Mm,
that is a little more loosey-goosey than it is when we're not pregnant. And
mm.
so the pelvis is just a little bit, we want it loosey-goosey for an easier birth, and we also want it as balanced as possible
There's
too.
balance. Yeah, that makes so much sense. One of the biggest issues that makes birth harder is when babies are malpositioned. And what Lynn's describing there is, and by the way, it's becoming more common. And what Lynn's describing there is a great example of why that can potentially be the case because of our lifestyle. Now, our
Yes.
say grandmothers, great grandmothers, they very rarely sat. They were on, walking and moving the whole time, which
And
would
didn't work in the
naturally
field.
balance.
Yes, and work in the fields and squatting and
Exactly. But
right.
when
So
we're
they
sitting all the time, a lot of us cross over our legs. We might lie on our sides on the couch watching TV for long periods of time, and that will have an impact. So, what we're doing here is really trying to promote good balance within the body for good positioning of the baby. When babies are positioned well, labour tends to go very well, or birth, the actual pushing stage and birth itself. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so the standing is also another thing that you want to be aware
Yeah.
of because some of us have a habit whenever we're standing and talking to someone, we put all of our weight on one leg.
You're right. Yeah, there's
The
another
way
example.
maybe jut out that hip a little bit, you know? And so if you're always doing that one side, you build up more muscle tone on that side, and
Mm,
you don't have the same muscle tone on the other side. And so it tightens up that side. So again, if you find yourself standing on one leg, shift over to the other leg, or better
mm,
yet, stay even on both legs. So here's what I tell my clients is, these are all habits and you're doing them unconsciously. So you're not even aware that you're doing them. So you
yeah.
need to become aware. And what I would encourage you to do is to let your partner know, if you're living with your partner, let your partner know, hey, honey, I need to stay more balanced on my body. So can you maybe come up with a signal? Because if you have them tell you every time you're doing it wrong, you're going to get mad at them,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But if you can just have, hey, honey, if you see me sitting on the couch, just put your hand on my shoulder, and that'll be our clue that I need to change the way that I'm sitting.
Mm,
Or if I'm standing on one leg, put your hand on my shoulder so that I now learn to do it differently.
mm.
So we just want even Steven pressure throughout our legs, throughout our pelvis while we're standing and while we're sitting. Now, you mentioned laying on the couch on your side. That isn't as impactful
Right.
as sitting crooked or sitting asymmetrically, okay? Because there's even pressure on the side of your leg. So if you are going to lay on the couch, great, lay on your side. Just switch to the other side and make it even. Now, one thing you do want to avoid though is a lot of times we get a lot of swelling in our legs during pregnancy. So what do we want to do? We want to elevate our legs. So if you're on the couch and you recline back and you put your legs up on the coffee table, or you're in the recliner and the legs lift up and now you're kind of being cradled in that recliner, you are setting yourself up for your baby potentially to turn into the occiput posterior position, meaning
Mm,
your baby's spine is going to be towards your spine. When we are in that reclined, legs propped up position, that babies tend to rotate into an OP position. And an occiput posterior, that's what OP means, is just the larger part of the baby's head coming into the pelvis, which makes it that much harder.
yeah.
So ideally, we want baby's face to be facing our spine. We want their back to be toward the front of your belly.
So,
And
Lynn,
that's
can I come in there? So what you're describing about balancing the body is something people need to be aware of for the whole pregnancy. When you talk about reclining and spending too much time doing that, when is it really relevant in
I
terms
would
of
yeah,
encouraging posterior labors? At what period in
I
the
would
pregnancy?
yeah, I would say late second to early, to third trimester, especially third trimester, avoid, avoid, avoid.
Right.
So mainly third trimester is when you want to be more conscious of avoiding that for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
And the best alternative, if you do know that, so what you can be aware of is where are the kicks and the wiggles. So if your baby's feet are poking straight out in the front of your belly, that means their back is towards your back. And that's not the most optimal position that you want to start labor in.
Mm,
What you want to do is spend as much time in hands and knees as possible. So
mm,
we want to be dangling your belly to help baby spin around to the front. And again, spinning babies has several other maneuvers that you can do to help get baby out of the pelvis and get it back in and help it to turn. So please, if you have an OP baby, check out Spinning Baby's website
mm.
and start doing some of those activities, okay?
Yeah.
The third area of the body that we need to make sure we assess and have nice even tone in as well are your pelvic floor muscles. I call the pelvic floor muscles the stoplight for birth. If we have red light tone in them, that is like the muscles are so tight that they have zero ability to lengthen at all. And I would like green light tone is like pushing like a trampoline. You guys have trampolines over in
Hmm.
Australia, right?
Yeah.
Where you press down on the trampoline, it gives and then it comes back up. We want good springy muscles on both sides of your pelvis. That's green light tone for birth. Red light tone is if you tried to press down on that trampoline, there is zero movement. Yellow light tone means you can maybe depress. It's a lot harder to get that trampoline to depress down a little bit, and it's a lot harder for it to come back up. And that's just mean like red light tone is telling the baby, do not come down this way. You are not coming out this way. Now, if you maybe go get an epidural, the epidural can bypass some of that tone, and then you might be able to get the baby on out. But I had this client who came to see me, and still to this day, I've been doing this now for over 10 years, working specifically with pregnant and postpartum clients, and she still wins the award for the tightest pelvic floor muscles I have ever palpated.
Wow.
They were
Was she a
concrete.
ballerina or something like that?
Oh, no, she wasn't. She was a doula, actually.
Wow.
And I gave this talk to a doula group, and she was there, and she was pregnant with her second baby at the time. And so she came to see me because in her first birth, she tried to do a home birth and she got to 4 centimeters dilation and just stalled out. And she ended up having to go to the hospital and getting an epidural. And then she was able to have a vaginal birth. And
Right.
so she really wanted to try a home birth this time. And so she came to see me. And again, she wins the award for the tightest pelvic floor muscles I have ever palpated. And I literally like could not get the muscles to move at all. And I'm really good at sensing into the tissue to see what that tension is all about and have can get them to release pretty easily. It took us 3 sessions to get her muscles to be able to lengthen on their own. And and she was able to have a successful vaginal birth. So at
Wow,
home.
lovely.
And I really truly believe had she not done that work with me, she probably would have gone down the same road that she
Mm.
did with the first birth. So I'm super grateful that she came in, and it was just such a beautiful experience. But the pelvic floor muscles are very similar to like the knots in your shoulders. People get a lot of tension in their shoulders, and some people walk around with their shoulders up by their ears, and they don't even realize it until all of a sudden they're like, oh, wait a minute, wait, oh, I can bring those down. The same tension can be held in the pelvic floor muscles. You can have tension in there. And especially if you are someone that tucks your butt under, like you're tucking your tailbone underneath and you clench your butt muscles. If you know that you're a butt clencher, that is a sign you may have tighter pelvic floor muscles. And we really want to avoid that tucking under of the pelvis. It's a beautiful thing to get a baby into the pelvis for birth. But to get the baby out, we need that tailbone to lift backwards. In order for that tailbone to lift backwards, your pelvic floor muscles have to lengthen. And so lengthening of your pelvic floor muscles are so critical to allow a baby to come on out of your pelvis.
So how do
And
women do that, Lynn? That sounds like a great thing to do. What would you
yes.
suggest?
Well, first off, you have to be aware of like, do you hold tension in there? So I want everybody to just do a contraction of their pelvic floor muscles and then see if you can let them relax. And so
Mm.
get a sense of, can you tighten them and can they relax? And then can you bear down and let them lengthen? So if you can think about having a bowel movement, like what do you do to allow stool to come on out? Sometimes that's a lengthening. But the analogy of the pelvic floor muscles is it's an elevator. And the pelvic floor muscles should be resting on the ground floor. And when we go to contract, we contract up to the 5th floor, and then we come back down to the ground floor. And for birth, the elevator's got to get to the basement. So the pelvic floor muscles have to lengthen to come down to the basement and then back up to the ground floor. So many women are hanging out in 3rd, 4th floor. One side could be 5th floor, one side could be 2nd floor, and it creates this asymmetry in your pelvic floor muscles. And so everybody is really focused in on doing perineal massage before birth. You may have heard, oh, you should
Mm.
massage your perineal body and get that used to birth. I would like to change the focus to the pelvic floor muscles more and the deeper pelvic floor muscles. So what I would encourage anyone who can still reach in vaginally, I'm talking to pregnant mamas here. So if you're like 3rd trimester and pregnant belly is really in your way, you may not be able to reach your vaginal opening, but do what you can to insert your finger in vaginally. And do not push down at 6 o'clock. Okay. So if you think of the vaginal opening like a clock,
Mm.
at the bottom near your tailbone and near your anus is 6 o'clock. To the top is where your urethra and your clitoris is. And so if you put your thumb right in the opening at the bottom, if you push in and push down, you're going to be pushing right down on your rectum. That doesn't
Yeah,
feel so great.
that's not a good
So
look.
no, no. So go off to either
Mm.
4 and 5 o'clock or 7 and 8 o'clock and put your thumb in as far as you can into those pelvic floor muscles and then depress it down. So if you're using your right thumb, push down on your left side pelvic floor muscles and kind of push down and at an angle. Just press down. Put your thumb all on the vaginal, on the tissues, and just press down. Can it give? It's that trampoline. Can you give it does it give easily and does it come back easily? Or is there resistance or does it not give at all? That's our red, yellow, and green light tone we're talking about. Use your left side to check out your right side pelvic floor muscles. And the further in you can reach with your thumb, the better, so that you can really feel. And how do you know if you're on a muscle? Put your thumb inside and then do a contraction. And if it moves, it's a muscle. So you know you're on a muscle. And so if you are really pregnant and like reaching your vaginal opening is just too awkward for you, work with your partner. Let your partner explain that, share this podcast with them, tell them what you need to do. The partner is going to I would use their index finger and have them put their index finger all the way in, avoid 6 o'clock, come off to 4 and 5 o'clock, and press and have them put the entire finger on tissue. If they know it's a muscle, have them contract and then relax so they know they're on a muscle, and then have them press down and see if they can give. Now, if we have tone in there and they don't give, then have your partner just press gentle pressure on that muscle that doesn't want to give. And you breathe down to that pressure and see if you can ask that muscle to let go. See if with just your breath and awareness, you're able to let that muscle go. And sometimes just practicing and doing that several times and, check this early on, like early third trimester, check and see what your pelvic floor muscles are doing. That way you have time to work on decreasing some of the tone that you find. And you want both sides to be even. Now, once you have the pelvic floor muscles even, what's even more important is figuring out how to push. When you go to push your baby out, you really want your pelvic floor muscles to lengthen out. So if you have your partner, and I'd really do this with your partner and not yourself, have your partner insert their finger in vaginally and have them reach back as far as they can and have them press more with the pad of their finger way back in there and let them know, like, where you feel that pressure is where you might start to feel the baby's head come in if you don't get an epidural.
Mm.
And have them do it on both sides. So if they're on one side, have him take off the pressure, go up and around your rectum, and then press down on the other side. And it's not going to hurt anything if he doesn't cause pain. So it may feel uncomfortable, but if it causes pain, have him stop. And then I would have you go see a pelvic floor physical therapist.
Mm.
But if it's not causing pain, then have him reach on the other side and press more with his finger. Now keep it in there. And then your job is to try to push his finger on out. Now, if he can put two fingers in and then he puts one finger on either side of the rectum, that's even better so that you get a sense from both sides what's happening in there. And then you practice having him push. You are going to push his fingers on out. So he just keeps his fingers on those muscles, just gentle pressure on your muscles. And then you work to try to figure out how can you best push those fingers. Now,
Interesting. So this is like pushing practice, really, isn't it?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely pushing practice, because one of the things we want to avoid is tearing of your pelvic floor muscles.
Mm.
One of the greatest things that causes the greatest amount of tearing is what I call reciprocal pushing. Reciprocal pushing is when you're trying to bear down from your belly, but you're tightening your pelvic floor muscles
Right.
and you're fighting yourself. That's what makes it so much harder for the baby to come through. You need to learn how to push and lengthen and relax your pelvic floor muscles. So I encourage everyone, practice this with your partner and practice it in every different position you can. If you are laying on, let's say you're laying in your bed and your partner's is got his fingers internally and you can't figure out how to push and lengthen your muscles and push his fingers out, turn yourself onto your side. Your partner can keep his fingers or their fingers inside internally, and you just roll away from them and they can keep their fingers inside, keep them still pressure on that muscle. Now for inside lying, see if you can figure out how to lengthen those muscles. If you get it there, or great. If not, and you're like, I still don't know what it's like, go ahead and now turn up and get on hands and knees. And your partner can keep his fingers in hands and knees while you get up onto your hands and knees. And then if not, have them take it out, get in hands and knees, have them find, that position again. But in hands and knees, I find it's way more easy for women to understand how to push effectively.
Which would make sense because that is a much better physiological position to be in.
Absolutely. It's my favorite position. I encourage my moms to, like, if you can, try to be on hands and knees when you're birthing. Because, most of the time, if you get an epidural, you're going to be on your back. So if you can't figure out how to lengthen on your back, try in side lying, try in hands and knees, and even in hands and knees, then you can get up into tall kneeling. Now you've got gravity helping out with the situation, and you can really lengthen. And being in tall kneeling is like the same position that we poop in. So it is easier for some people to get that experience of lengthening their pelvic floor muscles is exactly like pooping. And so think of that if you're like trying to figure out how to make this happen. Think about what you do to get your stool to come on out.
So
Then,
typically, Lynn, you wouldn't need to do this sort of practice if your pelvic floor is nice and like if there's, like you described in the trampoline, if it's a green where there's plenty of flexibility, it's not likely to be needed. But if there is tension in there,
no.
no?
I'm going to stop right there.
All right.
Women who have normal tone, women who have green light tone, still don't know how to effectively push.
Well,
Okay.
I would say most women do, particularly if they're in a good physiological position, because that urge to bear down and to poo, often they'll say, I feel like I need to do a poo. That's often a sign. When would
Right.
it not be effective?
Well, I don't know because I'm not working with people in the birthing process. I work with people a lot of times afterwards and go, oh, I was told I didn't know how to push effectively. I mean,
And I hear
I don't
that too. So I think this is
okay.
really interesting. Yeah.
So I just want to clarify that even though you have green light tone, it still doesn't mean that you know how to coordinate that muscular pushing movement. So you need to practice that. Everybody needs to practice this and figure out how to lengthen your pelvic floor muscles. Now, listen, everybody, if the idea of your partner sticking his fingers inside or you sticking your fingers inside and you're just like, yeah, I'm not that, have them put their hands on either side of your anus externally. Like, and you can do it with your clothes on even.
Yeah.
But if they can find where your anus is, and they can just go off on either side of your anus and put their fingers in there and press in gently, see if they can feel you pushing their fingers away. So
Okay.
this can all be done externally too. I just want to,
Right.
some people
That's
are a
great.
little,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't want it that, internally. Or maybe it's tender and you don't want anything in there internally. Work on it externally.
Yeah.
Have your partner put their fingers on either side, right inside of your sit bones, or just on either side of where your anus is, and have them put pressure in there, and you figure out how to push their thumbs away.
Interesting.
It's so helpful
And
to
the
know.
goal is to avoid tearing, which
Yes,
is
and so
is one of women's biggest fears.
it is,
Yeah.
and so there's a couple of things to keep in mind for that. One is I want to go back to the different positions. If you weren't able to do it in supine and you figure out how to do it in side lying and hands and knees, once you've got it figured out in an alternate position, go back to laying on your back and try it again.
Right. Great.
Okay, because
Okay.
you need to be able to push effectively in every position, because you never know what position you
Yeah.
need to be in order to get your baby on out. And I don't want anyone to be afraid of like, oh, I should never birth on my back. Sometimes you need to be on your back. So the
Mm.
biggest thing
Yeah.
is like try not to avoid anything. Like do
Mm.
what needs to happen in order to get your baby on out. Another just piece of advice is please be patient during the pushing phase to not overwhelm your tissues. So a lot of times when I get women who've had larger tears in their pelvic floor muscles, I ask them what happened and they say, "Oh, well, I just got anxious and I just wanted to get the baby on out, so I just pushed as hard as I could and I
Yeah.
just pushed really fast."
Or they get told they've only got 2 hours, and if you don't get them out in the next 5 or 10 minutes, we're going to start to intervene. And that can be enough to help women to push
Yeah,
into oblivion. So
right.
there can be
So
time pressures. Yeah.
yes, yeah, it's such a bummer. And
Yeah.
if you feel your baby at that opening, and really, the baby's head comes out and it stretches your tissues and then it comes back, and then it
Mm.
comes out and then it comes
Yeah.
back. And that
That's
is
right.
preparing your tissues to
Yeah.
stretch, be lengthened each time. And so um, if you bypass that, then that's where the tearing happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's where the tearing can
It happens
occur.
too quick.
So
Mm.
yeah, I know, it's an uncomfortable position to be in, and I know it's like, I just want to be done with this. But if
Mm.
you just try to avoid that,
Mm.
that can help you potentially to avoid the tearing. And to me, it's my sense, and I would love to do a study on this, but I think if we could get women to get even tone in their pelvic floor muscles and learn how to lengthen during pushing, I'd
Mm.
love to see the studies on tears. And
Yeah.
I really feel like maybe we could diminish the amount of tearing that happens if we
Mm.
could do that.
Absolutely. And I think it would be great if there was a greater focus on that with our care
Absolutely.
providers
Well, so
who,
here's the thing.
yeah.
Yeah, here's the thing that I've learned and heard from. I've trained midwives in how to release the pelvic floor muscles.
Mm.
And they tell me that when a labor stalls or baby's not coming on and out, if they go in and release the pelvic floor muscles, babies come right on out.
Mm. Interesting.
So it
These
really,
skills are
truly
gold,
is.
aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they're the stoplight for birth. So
Beautiful. So, what Lynn has shared with us today, I think, is really powerful information in understanding some of the things we can do that can make a biggest difference, which is always what I'm about when it comes to birth. Understanding the need to balance the body, understanding the need for baby to have plenty of room to be able to head down and navigate its way through the pelvis, and also looking at the role of the pelvic floor in helping baby to come through, but also to be able to lengthen, reduce the amount of tearing, and have that lovely transition of baby into the world. Lynn, I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom. I'm going to put in the show notes all of Lynn's contact details if you want to look into this more. Is there anything else you'd like to say to finish us off today?
yeah, for birth, I just really want to encourage anyone who's pregnant and going into labors to really trust your body. Trust the instincts of your body. Birth is a dance between you and your body and the baby. And your body knows how to get the baby out, and the baby knows how to get out. And if you can just trust that instinct of what you want to do and figure out a way to make that happen, I think that's your body's way of knowing how to birth it. And the other key thing is that the part of your body that knows how to birth is your animalistic, your reptilian brain. And so for that to be on, your cognitive brain needs to be
Yep,
taken off.
exactly.
And so you really need to not be thinking too much, and you need to be feeling in your body and listening to what your body wants to do. So if you're pregnant listening to this podcast for the rest of your pregnancy, I want you to really start paying attention to your interoception. Those are the internal signals your body is always trying to give you to let it know what it needs. And
Mm.
so that's the thirst, that's the hunger, that's the tired. Those are interoceptive signals for what your body needs. And the more you can pay attention to those and listen to that, I think the better off you're going to be in birth when you don't get an epidural. because and please know that in labor, you are not meant to suffer. And so if labor is getting in too intense, you need to get support. So if you need to get that epidural, great, get that epidural. It's there for you. But there's also other options. There's TENS units. There's, nitric oxide. There's other options for pain management to help you get through that process so that you can still move and be able to listen to your body so that you can do what you want what it needs to do to help you get that baby on out. One of the things I hear the most from my postpartum clients is, I just knew if I could get up in hands and knees, the baby would come on out. But the birthing staff didn't allow that for whatever reason. Maybe they had an epidural, I don't remember. But, so you tell your partner's job, let your partner know your partner's job is to make your wishes be followed through.
Beautiful.
And so,
thank you.
Yeah, there's so
That's
much.
wonderful.
Thank you for having me, Tracy, so much.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate having people, particularly people who work in the trenches, first, one-to-one with women. That's where we learn a lot of birth wisdom, and it's where we can really start to appreciate the power of a woman's body. But what you're describing today of optimizing that mother's body's response to birth and supporting the baby's navigation through the pelvis is absolute gold. So thank you all, everyone, for listening, and we'll have some more goodness for you next week. Bye for now.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe and share this podcast. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. It is a place where you can learn, get support and grow into your role as a parent. Why not take advantage of a special gift for all pregnant women at transformyourbirth.com.au. Or if you have children, we have a gift for parents also.